The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for D.B. Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. On the show today, we have Nicholas Broughton, known in the Vortex as NickyB. Nicky got pulled into the Vortex against his will, and like most people, couldn't get out. He's done a ton of research on a brand new suspect that you probably haven't heard of before, James Klansnic. I had a great time hearing from my friend Nicky, and I'm sure you will too.
You know, I feel like I feel like I got pretty much DB Cooper. I mean, I feel like I got the best suspect for sure. Out of any, I mean, not any disrespect to any of the other suspects, and everyone's gonna say their suspect is the best, but I do feel when you look at everything that I got, when you look at my whole body of evidence, I feel like it's more likely than not than if it wasn't. I feel like more likely than not, if it wasn't my suspect. It was like someone right close to him.
Let me ask you this. When did you first hear about D.B. Cooper?
I've always been into unsolved mysteries and stuff. One of my favorite shows going back in the day was Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. I don't know if you've ever watched that show at all or remember that show.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that was a great one. So I always used to watch that show. So that kind of from a young age got me into like unsolved mysteries and stuff like that. So that I always had kind of an interest just from kind of watching that show, which is one of my favorites. And then I first heard about D.B. Cooper probably around 2011 when that whole thing came out with Marla. And then and David Carr kind of got on and all that stuff. I kind of started following a little bit then because it was just like in the media and stuff. Because before that, I mean, I wasn't, I'm only 30, Darren, so I wasn't real. I was not even alive when that actually happened.
Yeah, me neither.
So that was the kind of first time it kind of came on my radar. And I do actually remember watching, like as a kid, watching the DB Cooper episode from Unsolved Mysteries. But like I watched that and I was like interested by it, and then nothing kind of spurred until that 2011 when I heard kind of spurred it back up again. But then it was pretty much really quickly, kind of brought down that there was really nothing to it. Although it was very interesting, the FBI paid a lot of attention to that claim, to Marla's claim. There was a lot of people that have come out the woodwork before and after that never really got the FBI attention. But for some reason, I guess Marla had some connection with a gentleman that was working at the FBI at the time, and that was the last case agent on D.B. Cooper, Curtis Ang. There we go. So she had a relationship actually with Curtis. I mean, I don't know what Curtis's fascination, if they had something romantic going on or not, or what. It was just kind of interesting to me that the FBI really took a serious interest in it. Now, there is actually a good reason why they probably would have, which is because L.D. Cooper's brother actually worked at Boeing, actually worked at Boeing. And he was a surveyor. So when you looked at it from those few couple things, you're like, oh man, this actually could seem like something pretty good here. Maybe that's why they kind of jumped on it, but I don't really know. It was interesting what happened with the whole Marla thing, but that ended up, I mean, pretty much being disproven. But that's kind of what re-sparked it from the old unsolved mystery, and then I kind of forgot about it again up until
Because you grew up in Southern California, right?
yeah, I've been living up in Southern California. I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, suburb of LA, pretty much all my life, and then I moved up to Lake Elsinore, which is kind of right in between San Diego and LA, kind of more towards the San Diego area, Inland Empire. And when I moved up there, that's where I actually ran into a guy by the name of Airborne Bob, Robert Rackstraw.
Okay.
And you guys probably already know about Airborne Bob Rackstraw from Colbert's thing that happened in 2016. So that's actually what kind of got me going back up on the really kind of sucked me into the vortex back in 2016 when that History Channel documentary came out on Rackstraw. And I actually knew Rackstraw, met him the year before. So when that History Channel docu came out, I was like, "Oh wow, I think this guy's DB Cooper. I know I met this guy. I'm like, this is crazy, you know." So that really,
Oh, so you didn't know that History Channel documentary was about him?
I didn't know it was going to be about him. I just heard it was going to be a new History Channel documentary. They solved the DB Cooper case. You know, that's pretty much what it sounded like. You know, case closed. That's the way they kind of pitched it in the kind of pitched it in the trailers. You know, because I'm a History Channel. I watch History Channel a lot, and I'm probably what something else I was watching there the other day, and that promo probably came on, and then it piqued my interest for sure.
And did you talk to Bob about it?
I didn't know it was going to be about Bob. That's the thing. I had no idea. So when I saw the special, I was like, holy schmoly. I'm like, I know this guy. And then I started, after all the evidence that Colbert brought forth, it was definitely some good stuff, man. You know, I was definitely sucked in. That's what got me in the vortex. I mean, I was pretty much gung ho on Rackstraw. I pretty much thought he's probably the guy. I thought Tom Colbert, he did the work. He's got a cold case team. He's got all these pieces of evidence. I'm like, man, this looks solid. But you know what? My curiosity peaked, and I'm like, I want to see for myself, because basically the way I got to know Mr. Rackstraw is through a mutual acquaintance. I don't want to mention his name, but let's. I mean, we're cool. We're cool talking about it. He was my weed. He was my weed supplier.
Okay.
Pretty much, and we became friends. I'd help him out. He was growing weed and doing some different stuff, and I'd help him out with trimming and different endeavors that he was working in. And sometimes I would be stuck going on him on deliveries when he had to make some deliveries. And a few times it was to this guy. He called him Crazy Bob. He's like, yeah, we gotta go deliver to Crazy Bob. But every time he come in,
Fitting nickname.
He was so, yep, that's what he called him. He called him Crazy Bob. I mean, I had no idea who this guy was. He was a Crazy Bob. We just go down there to the marina down in San Diego. We're in Lake Elsinore. Not too far down there from San Diego, so we would go down there to this marina, and whenever he placed an order for some stuff, and I wouldn't roll down there every time, but once in a while, if I was already working with him on a job or something, and Crazy Bob calling, we need to go down there, and then sometimes I was just stuck going with him. Um, but yeah, I mean, he was really, he was a really nice, he's a really nice jovial guy. The guy, he was always telling the stories from his days in Vietnam, and all of that. And I thought he was a cool guy for sure. He's a crazy character. But then I see that History Channel docu, and there he is. I'm like, the hell?
It's
I think
DB
this
Cooper.
guy's D. They think this guy's DB Cooper, right? Crazy stuff, right? Crazy as the universe works like that, right? Like literally, like I probably met this guy about 6 months before the Cooper special ended up coming out, and then we were actually approached by a member of Tom Colbert's cold case team. After the History Channel special came out, I was really intrigued. I'm like, oh wow. I'm like, I really thought, like after I thought all his evidence. I'm like, Colbert's really got something here, And I'm like, I know this guy. I'm like, wouldn't that be cool? Like, I actually met DB Cooper, like, So I was like, I wanted to really, Colbert had a lot of great pieces of evidence, but I felt like he still didn't have enough to really prove that Rackstraw was DB Cooper.
Right.
So that's where I kind of took a liberty on myself to do a little citizen sleuthing of my own, with kind of already my a little bit of in with Rackstraw, to see what else I can find out, see if I can really, kind of clamp this down, because it still wasn't enough for the FBI. All of Colbert's evidence, and it still wasn't enough for me either. And then that's why I kind of took it upon myself to really find out if Rackstraw was really DB Cooper.
Because if the FBI thought he was Cooper, then he'd be arrested.
Yeah, and he was actually looked at in 19. He was actually looked at back in the 70s. They flew him back from Iran. I mean, the whole. If you watched the documentary, if you know Colbert's story on him, you already know pretty much what happened with Rackstraw there.
Right. Yeah, I'm hoping to have Colbert or maybe even Rackstraw also on the show.
That would be awesome. Colbert, pretty much, if you listen to all of his interviews, he just regurgitates the same stuff over and over. He's got nothing new. I mean, Colbert's pretty much everyone that's in this corner. They've been paid to be in this corner. Like I said, we were kind of. I was kind of strong-armed by Colbert and his team to work with them. Okay. Like I said, they were doing their own stakeout on Rackstraw at the marina, and we were there one night making delivery to Rackstraw, and they rolled up on us, and they were basically like, look, and this is where they already knew who I was, because at this point I was already on the forums, already kind of chatting it up, already kind of making myself known as a sleuth in the Cooperville.
Jumped right into the vortex.
Exactly. I just jumped right in. Like the vortex just sucks you in, man. But so I think their guys already saw some of my posts on the forums and stuff. So they exactly knew who I was when they rolled up on us one day when we were outside of Rackstraw's marina, and they tried to strong arm me in particular to work with them. And I didn't want any trouble at that point, so I said, Okay. I mean, I was already sleuthing the case. I was already interested. I said, okay. I said, okay, Tom.
What did they ask you to do?
Basically, they wanted me just to keep relations with Rackstraw. See if I can get on the boat. See if I can see if I can just dig more. Just get more information on him. You know. And Rackstraw was tough. I mean, and that if you know Rackstraw's background, he's a very scary guy. So I was approaching this with kit gloves, so to speak. So I was like, okay. I told Colbert and his team, I'm like, okay, I'll do what I can, and I'll brief you on it on any new information I get. So that's kind of how I started out.
Did you have any information to provide them, really?
And I did. I actually, well, not from Rackstraw directly, because he's the. I mean, the guy is as slick as they come. I mean, he's as slick as a duck's back. I mean, like, if you've heard Rackstraw, you've heard Colbert's report on him, all his stories. It's true, man. The guy is a con. The guy's a con man's con man. He's absolutely slick. Um, but
His
it's
story's pretty incredible.
yeah, it's incredible. Uh, but I was able to learn stuff through about Rackstraw, but not from him. I had to go through other sources. So I had to find the ex. He had a lot of ex-wives, right? So that was already a good little source right there. So I went through his ex-wives on Facebook, and through one of them, this is where I actually got this for Colbert. And you've heard Colbert mention this on a couple of his podcasts that he doesn't give me credit for, but I'm the one that unearthed this for him. Was one of his ex-wives saying that Rackstraw, at one point he had a stroke. He was pretty much about to die, and he admitted on his deathbed to her that he was involved. Now, see, I only said that he admitted that he was involved. So Colbert's going to take that as he was DB Cooper, but I don't know that. I got one of his exes to admit that to me, that when he had a stroke and thought he was going to die, he told her that he was involved in the DB Cooper case.
Yeah, a couple different people have said they think, it's possible that multiple prominent suspects are involved in the crime and not just one person.
And you know what? That is not a theory that I'm not going to discount, because you have a lot of these suspects that have been found in very weird circumstances and locations at that time. So for one example, Richard Floyd McCoy, who a lot of people believe, was DB Cooper. He was in Las Vegas. If you believe Russell, the FBI agents Russell Kalam, and his partner Bernie Rhodes, he was in Vegas. They say they have phone records and everything that he was in Vegas the night of the Cooper skyjacking. So you wonder, if you know Richard Floyd McCoy's background. He's a Mormon,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't drink, doesn't gamble. So you got to wonder, what was he doing in Las Vegas the night of the eve of Thanksgiving? Um, Very, very, very strange. Okay.
That's odd.
Then you got, yeah, that is very odd. I mean, and I still haven't seen the actual receipts or anything with my own eyes, but if you take it for face value, I mean, there's some weight in, there's definitely some weight in it that McCoy was in Vegas that night. And then another weird one, even with the latest guy.
Walter Recca.
Yes, with Walt. So with Walt, I mean, none of the stuff really adds up. But the fact that he was in Cle Elum in the wood. That's the only thing like that seemed to probably that could be true, that he was in Cle Elum in the woods soaking wet, like Bruce said. Like, that's the only thing Bruce took that thought that probably was real. And I trust his Bruce instincts. So if he thought that was true, then I'll go with that Walter Recca was in Cle Elum, Washington, and he got picked up out of the woods with the soaking wet with the suit or whatever. I don't think he was DB Cooper, but I think that very well could have happened. And that's also like some that you
Yeah, and
have
you
to
have to
wonder
wonder
why.
why.
Exactly. Okay, and then we have another similar situation with names escaping me right now at the moment. There's so many suspects in this thing, Darren. It's so hard to it's crazy, man. It's crazy. But
There's so many suspects.
bottom line is this: I've looked them all. I've looked everyone up and down, and every suspect. There's something that kind of goes against it, right? There's something there's something there's some boxes that you can't check off. There's something that goes against it there. There's always something with every suspect that goes against the grain. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, everyone is looking over certain flaws in their suspect and pointing to circumstantial evidence. It could be this
Yes.
person or that person.
And there's a lot of discrepancies in every suspect. But I believe when we start looking at the person of interest of mine that I believe is DB Cooper, and I've been spending countless hours looking for one box that I can't check off or something to go against, something that just goes against it, and I haven't been able to find anything, Darren.
And who's your suspect, Nicky?
That'd be James Edward Klansnic.
And when did you first hear that name?
I first heard about James Edward Klansnic right after we kind of finished up our investigation into Rackstraw. So, kind of go back a little bit more. Colbert's team had me doing some work for him. I agreed disgruntledly to help him out and to kind of help him out, see what more information I can get. I just couldn't deal with Colbert and his team the way they were, the way they dealt with me. So pretty much, I was still just I just wanted to figure out because when it first came out, I really thought they had something with Rackstraw there. I really did. All that evidence, it looked really good. But I'm like, I have to sleuth this out for myself, and then I can't keep killing Tom and these guys letting me get involved. I gotta sleuth this out for myself. So that was when I linked up with another sleuth, kind of like another younger sleuth that just came on after the History Channel documentary. It kind of spurred up a lot of new blood into kind of the Cooper Vortex, so to speak. Younger blood, because we've had our mainstays for the longest time. Back since back since the internet age kind of got popular on the internet, back since the very late 1990s, and then through the 2000s on the Drop Zone forum, and then later DB forum. But you got your kind of mainstays that were there from the beginning. Probably Bruce was kind of like the last one to join on the party, but Bruce is, I mean, he's the godfather in my eyes. The way he's kind of covered everything, and all the information he's been able to dig up and bring forward to the table.
Oh yeah, I've heard a lot of people call him the mayor of Cooperville.
The mayor, the godfather. I mean Bruce. He's the man, and he's not afraid to stick his nose in there. And he's looking for the truth. but you also got to remember with Bruce too. He still's got the Mountain News. He still needs DB Cooper to be a mystery. But Bruce, I mean, the work Bruce has done for Cooper and the community has been existential. I mean, I've learned a lot, especially about the parachutes, and he's done a lot of awesome work, for sure.
Oh yeah.
But basically, after the History Channel docu, some new it got me in the scene, and then it got another guy in the scene, which I'm sure some of the Cooperites probably know him. His name is Derek Godsey.
I've tried very hard to get him on the show.
Yeah, Derek is he's a very I don't even know quite how to say it. Derek is just Derek. He's a very much so a loose cannon. So basically, he came on the scene a little bit. He came on the scene a little bit after me, and he was on the forums, and he had a lot of energy. He seemed like he was really gung ho to try to figure out this case, and he thought it was Rackstraw too. He was really buying into Tom Colbert's stuff, and I at the time I thought it was Rackstraw too. I was pretty much a believer for a certain point. And I kind of linked up. I was working with Colbert, and Colbert started wanting me to do some extra stuff that I wasn't really comfortable with doing. Okay. Got to remember Robert Rackstraw. He's still a very dangerous guy. Very dangerous guy from what I've gathered. So what Colbert was trying to get me to do, I wasn't comfortable with. Okay. But Derek, he was online, and he was very gung ho trying to make things happen. And I started chatting up with him. I said, Derek, let's work together here. Power in numbers. Let's try to pin down Rackstraw. I think it's at the same we had mutual interest. We both thought it was Rackstraw. So I said, Derek, he'll never give me credit for this. Takes it all for himself. But I said, Derek, this is the time when that show Catfish was getting pretty popular. Remember, that show Catfish, MTV?
Yeah, I know that show.
Yeah, that show Catfish. Mm-hmm. So I was just watching an episode, and it just came to me, and I just hit up Derek. So we had been in talks. I'm like, Derek, why don't you catfish Rackstraw? Get a nice little profile, get a good little middle-aged woman on there, and because Derek definitely has some skills. He's on the internet, like he's definitely a resourceful guy, So I was trying to use him, to my advantage. At
the very least, he's motivated.
He was motivated. The guy, the guy's a Looney Tune, but he had motivation. He was trying to figure this thing out. That's why I was like, okay, take a shot in the dark with you, Derek. So I gave him this idea to catfish Rackstraw. So he took it, knowing the typical Derek fashion, gave it to him, and he just ran with it. Next thing you know, he had the profile up. He was chatting up Rackstraw. Had Rackstraw sending all kinds of pictures that Tom Colbert never had. All these good shots, selfies in the gym, everything. I was posting it up on the Cooper forums too, and everything. And they banned Derek pretty much really quickly, just because they weren't taking too kind to his approach. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I remember it at the time. I thought it was great.
It was pretty funny stuff, Darren. If you remember what was going on, my man. So after kind of Derek did that, and Derek was sending me all the screenshots back and sending me all the texts, and and then me and Derek, we kind of came to the same conclusion. We were like, man, it's Rackstraw had all the skills, right? He was a con man. He he was pretty much. I mean, as far as qualification wise, there probably is not a better candidate out there, to be honest with you. But when you start looking a little deeper, okay, Rackstraw was still 29 years old at the time. The first report of the FBI was 50 years old. I mean, I know you can get some age wrong, but 29 to 50, that's kind of odd gap. Then it came down to 45, but whatever. I mean, I can understand how like some younger people, like Bill Mitchell, to someone a little bit older, can think they're like a lot older. But I just think that's
too large an age gap.
That's too wide a gap.
And I think women are more observant with that than men are. And
women are more, exactly. Women are more observant with that. And, the D.B. Cooper case is different than a lot of other cases where people want to say, well, eyewitness testimony is not always so correct or so good, But I argue in the D.B. Cooper case because you had two women, well, mainly Tina Mucklow, that was lit a cigarette, was within inches of the guy, up close for over 2 hours. He lit a cigarette. He was up close to him. She had plenty of time to like observe. It's not like a bank robbery or something where the guy's moving and it's all chaos. You have a situation of a 2 hours period of time that it was actually under calm situations, because that's the way Cooper ran it, where she had plenty of time to observe and see.
Yeah, she sat next to him and had a conversation.
She was there with him for 2 hours. I think there was enough there to get a good sketch, So that's where I believe the DB Cooper sketch is pretty spot in my personal opinion. I don't think it's very far off.
Yeah, I think it's got to be pretty close.
That's what I think. So, but basically after I had Derek do that kind of catfishing, this is kind of what the conclusion we came up with. Was that wasn't Robert Rackstraw on that plane. Okay, that if Robert Rackstraw was on that plane, the reports of his demeanor, how he acted, would have been different from the reports we got from looking in the FBI files. Okay. DB Cooper spoke very low. He was very calm. He spoke very sophisticatedly. Where Rackstraw, that just wasn't his. It wasn't his. He didn't use that kind of vocabulary from Derek talking to him and exchanging. From if reading the text, the back and forth text, the words he used, it just didn't match up. And then the fact that he had Tina Mucklow and he had Florence Schnafter. Florence, I believe, was a former Miss something. I don't know if you know anything on that.
I don't, but they're both really good-looking gals.
Yeah, they were both really good-looking knockouts, and one of them was a former beauty pageant for I forgot what city. And after Derek, did that whole catfish thing, and the way Rackstraw was he's just such a dog, man. That guy he's a flirt, he's a womanizer, So we pretty much the demeanor does not match up to the demeanor of the hijacker. If Rackstraw was on that plane, he would have been flirting with the wait. He would have been flirting with Tina. Would have been flirting with Flo. He wouldn't have been so cool of a customer. It just doesn't match up the personality wise. So after kind of actually,
I remember Derek saying on the forums then that he made Rackstraw fall in love with him in 5 minutes.
yeah, quick, yep,
But he was set with Tina Mucklow for 2 hours
mm-hmm,
and didn't hit on her one time.
exactly, exactly. So after we kind of learned that, and we kind of just learned the kind of person Rackstraw was, it just didn't match up. It just didn't match up to the person from what we know that was on that flight 305 Northwest Orient on November 24th, 1971.
Yeah, and like you said, the age difference was always the biggest thing for me with Rackstraw.
The age, the blue eyes, and then just his demeanor. Like he would have flirted with him. He would have said something out of the way. He's a younger guy. He wouldn't have been as cool. Like he wouldn't have been as cool and chill. Um, I don't think he would have offered a tip. Like after he got his drink, he paid with a $20 bill. He said keep the change. I just don't think that was Rackstraw's personality. Just didn't really jive with what the evidence shows the person that was on that plane. But I believe when you look at my suspect, James Edward Klansnic, he fits it to a T.
How did you guys go from Rackstraw to Klansnic? So there's all this evidence against Rackstraw, so then you have to start all over.
We got to start all over again. Exactly. We're back. Me and Derek, we're back to the drawing boards. Derek's a loose cannon. We've kind of had a little bit of rocky thing there when we were working with each other and dealing with Colbert, and it was a whole nightmare. But basically, after me and Darren came to that same conclusion, and then we were like, all right, man, let's team up here. We know this wasn't the guy, but we've already put so much time and energy. We can't just give up now, So that's where I looked at Tom Kay's Citizen Sleuth's tie analysis. Okay. He did the first one, I believe, back in 2011. And then he did the latest one back in 2017 with McCrone's Labs. Okay. So we had the latest 2017 already. Pretty much it already had come out after I think it was before the History Channel docu. I think it already had come out. Or it was actually not before that. It was with the History Channel. That's who ponied it up. So that was maybe like 4 or 5 months later. The History Channel did a little special on DB, and they ponied up the money for Tom to take it to Macron's lab and do a more
much more thorough
analysis on the tie. Yeah, a more thorough analysis, because the first one Tom did back in, I believe, 2011. He just used his own electron microscope, which is pretty good. They got some stuff, but it wasn't the best of the best technology to really, if you want to really get a full profile of the particles on the tie. Right. So after that history, so we were kind of just in a little bit of a waiting period. We were just pretty much just looking at Boeing employees, because I told Derek that's what we got to go on, man. We got to go on Boeing engineers from the 50s. That's kind of what I wanted to start our search on, because from what I gathered, DB and everyone pretty much that you talk to, they won't deny this. They won't deny this fact, and they'll tell you like Bruce has said it. No one can pretty much deny this. DB Cooper knew more about the 727 than the pilots, than operations, than the flight crew, everybody.
Yeah, he told him how to fly and what settings to put everything at.
Right. So when you look at, like, first of all, the 15-degree flap setting, that was exclusive to the Boeing 727. That was exclusive to it. So there's no other commercial aircraft that had a 15-degree flap setting. Second, the fuel tanks. DB Cooper knew exactly how long it took to fuel those tanks up. And the second that it didn't get fueled in time, it wasn't fueled up in time it should normally be, he was right away raising a fuss. Okay? But it goes beyond that. If you listen, there's an interview out there you can find it on YouTube. It's from the Washington State Historical Society. I forgot the gentleman's name they interviewed. I don't know if you've heard this one, Darren. If you haven't, I recommend you listen to this interview with this guy. He worked for Northwest Orient as he was like a freight mechanic or something like that. But he was there on the night, and he did an interview with the Northwest Orient. He did an interview with the Washington State Historical Society back in I think it was 2000 something, where they had a little they had a little display going on there in Washington. They had Norman Hayden give them the chute. They had that on display, the whole nine, and they interviewed a couple people. One of them was that guy. The other guy was Bill Mitchell. But anyway, he said that DB Cooper specifically told him how to fill up the tanks. So he knew exactly. He gave him a specific percentage to fuel in each tank, and he knew exactly the size of the tanks. And this was strategically to fly the way that they were going to fly, which was like low, like Cooper called it, fly dirty, or like the low and slow. He specifically fueled the tanks up this way for the way they were going to fly, which just shows extensive, more than just, some not like more than knowledge that someone just could have learned from somebody or from reading something.
Yeah, he definitely knew more about the plane than the pilots.
Absolutely. And they had not just the pilots. I mean, so James Klansnic worked in Boeing Commercial Airlines. So they actually called the top guy at the time at Boeing Commercial to get most of that information. So that information came from the same division Klansnic worked in, which I thought was pretty cool.
So how do you guys arrive at Klansnic? It wasn't a name that I had heard or seen in the Vortex before, and then suddenly, boom, here's this new suspect.
Exactly. It's the guy you never heard of, man. You know what? It's the guy you never heard of. He came out from out of the blue. He was just a lucky find. I mean, me and Derek, I had Derek looking at Boeing employees 1955, 1956. We were both going through them like crazy. And we stumbled upon that article. James Klansnic. It was about the Boeing 727 hydraulics and pneumatics article. And it goes into great detail on the Boeing 727. And you read that article, that article is so detailed. This guy knows more than pretty much anybody on the 727, the way the article was written. Okay, from that article you can put him as one of the most knowledgeable 727 engineers that worked on it.
And was the article by him, or was it the article them interviewing him?
The article was by him. He was the author. It was authored in 1964. It was the July 1964 issue of Hydraulics and Pneumatics magazine.
Many people's
And it
favorite
was
magazine.
and it was called the Boeing 727 More and Better. Hydraulics more Boeing 727 Hydraulics More and Better. And the aft stairs ran off hydraulics. He definitely knew how the aft stairs worked. He knew they could be lowered in flight. He had all the knowledge of the 727. He knew about the flaps. He knew exactly how to fly that plane for what he was trying to accomplish, and that was no problem. I mean, he was at home. That's why he was so part of the majority of the reason why he was so comfortable. I mean, it was his plane. He was stepping into his domain.
When you saw that article, how quickly did you think maybe it's this guy?
Right away. It was just weird because in that article, he was sitting under a 727 with the black clip-on tie that was found on the plane, with the olive complexion, with the hair parted the same way. The nose looked spot on. We've actually sent all of our facial we put our face to face comparisons from Klansnic to the sketch. We did every single combo we can find on every sketch and with every Klansnic picture. His older one to the aged one. We sent it to the top forensic guy that judges that out in Houston, and he's blown away.
It looked like a match to him.
He was blown away. He said he's match.
So then you have to look into him.
That's one of the top guys. But facial stuff, sketch, eyewitness. That's all. That's not 100% conclusive. But I believe I have something that is 100% conclusive.
Well, let's hear it.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And this is my smoking gun. This is what makes me believe that I've found the real DB Cooper. And more likely than not, it's him. There's nobody else that can be him. That can be DB Cooper.
Well, what'd you find, Nicky?
I told you before, we went by Tom K's tie analysis. That's how we originally found Klansnic, right? Because it pointed to Boeing. It pointed to Boeing. He pointed to Boeing engineers with the tie findings. So we started going Boeing engineers. We were looking at them up all day, and we came up on Klansnic. We just found so much there that it just couldn't be a coincidence, Darren. First of all, he had one of the most extensive obituaries online you would have ever seen. It was so informative. I mean, me and Derek learned more about Klansnic in his obituary than either of us did combined, with him catfishing, me personally talking to him and trying to do my own stuff. We learned more about Klansnic in that obituary. It was more like a nice memorial. We learned more in that than we did about Klansnic in all of our work in one just quick read.
You mean about Rackstraw?
Yeah, we learned more about Klansnic in his memorial page than we did on Rackstraw, looking at him for 6 months.
Just goes to show how slippery Rackstraw is.
Just goes to show. But little would you know, that obituary page had since been removed.
Really?
Yes, had since been removed. We discovered it I don't know exactly when we discovered it. But we discovered it, and it was about up maybe for about 6 months after, maybe 6 months or so after we discovered it. At this point, me and Derek had kind of gone our own separate ways. We were working on Rackstraw together for a little bit. We were both. I mean, I was working for Colbert. I got Derek under me, and then we both had enough with Colbert, and then me and Derek were still trying to work for a little bit. And that's when we found Klansnic, and then once we found Klansnic, then Derek just went on pretty much Crusader mode. He wouldn't listen to reason anymore. He just was like, oh, I found DB Cooper, and then at that point he was just trolling, spamming.
A lot of people in the Pacific Northwest will know him as the DB Cooper troll.
Yes, I don't know if he's. I haven't kept up in the last couple of weeks, but I know for a minute there he was posting on every Facebook group in the Pacific Northwest. Anything related, he was posting up. James Klansnic was DB Cooper. James Klansnic was DB Cooper. Just posting.
Yeah, I have friends who have zero interest in DB Cooper and are aware of the DB Cooper troll.
Yeah, that's what he's known as, is the DB Cooper troll. So I mean, so that's where he's kind of sabotaged, the investigation for me. I mean, I've always knew he was a loose cannon. He was successful in kind of helping us. It kind of helped us figure out that Rackstraw wasn't the guy. But after that, once we found Klansnic, he pretty much stopped trying to do any kind of investigation. He's like, okay, this has got to be him. Because Derek's a very visual guy. So he just goes, if the stats matches up, he thinks it's it. He's been trying to solve a bunch of other cold cases. He wrongfully accused 2 people of being the Golden State Killer from the wrong sketch. I don't know if you heard anything about that, but yeah, he wrongfully accused 2 people of being the GSK of the wrong sketch. And now he's doing the same thing with the Delphi murders.
I saw that today. I wanted to do some Klansnic research, and I saw he had that going on his Twitter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So he's wrongfully accused 2 people of being the Golden State Killer. Traumatized one, built this Bill Doss guy. It wasn't the Golden State Killer, but he's traumatized that guy and his family. And Derek just went completely. You can't control him. He's his own guy. He's gonna do what he's gonna do.
But have you reached out to James Klansnic's family?
So Derek already took the lib. That's what I'm saying. When Derek saw Klansnic, he just went. That was it. Once we found Klansnic, Derek he just went off on rogue mode. So he started hitting up every member of the Klansnic families, whoever he can find on Facebook. He was just hitting him up, and they didn't respond to him. He got one response from Klansnic's son, or grandson, Tyler Klansnic. He responded back, and then once he said, "Oh, I think your father was DB. I think your grandpa was DB Cooper." He never heard back from him again. But I have actually taken it upon myself to reach out to some of the Klansniks, and I have also haven't had any success. Probably because Derek already kind of burnt that bridge for me. But I was able to connect with one member of the Klansnic family. It's actually James Klansnic's grand nephew.
Okay.
And he was actually really cool. He's a little bit younger than me, but he's a younger guy. But he seemed pretty mature. He was a cool dude, nice guy. And I I messaged him on Messenger, and I just pretty much, I pretty much couldn't really beat around the bush with him. I was trying for a little bit, but then I just had to let him know. I'm like, there's some people that think that your that your great uncle was DB Cooper, and you know what he told me? You know what he told me, Darren?
Let's hear it.
He told me that I'm not surprised. I've heard something like this before.
That's weird.
And then he goes on to talk about a cocktail party that was going on at his house, and his parents and friends talking over some drinks. And they were talking about James Klansnic. And they were talking about it. He said, this is his words. He was like, they were talking about his work at Boeing. And then they were talking about airplanes and money. Okay. I try to pry in a little bit more to get more details. He was like, well, I wasn't really in on the conversation. But when I messaged him and said that I thought his grand uncle might be DB Cooper, his immediate response was, you know what, I'm not so surprised. I've heard these talks before. And that was the situation he shed some light on to me. I tried to get some more information. He just said basically, he said it was he called it bad jokes about airplanes and money. But if he was saying obviously he took some of it to real, or else he wouldn't have made that comment to begin with, that he wasn't surprised.
Yeah, it was obviously worth remembering.
So that was the first person connected to Klansnic that I actually made contact with, and he's on the other side of the family. So he's a younger guy. He's got his own stuff going on. So he's kind of been a little bit helpful, but I don't know how much the family's kind of tell him not to get involved, But what Darren, what I find really interesting is this. I did not tell Derek to do any of this. The guy's just a loose cannon. But when he started doing all his spamming, when he started just going at all of the members of the Klansnic family and bombarding them and making all these claims, why has it just been a complete no response, kind of cold shoulder, like just nothing? Like they're not putting any no police charges, no lawsuit, no nothing. They're just letting Derek just spew off whatever the hell he wants to say.
That is interesting. You haven't heard, like, you guys need to stop this. It isn't him. Leave us alone. Just no response.
Yeah, nothing. And just no response. Because I've been focused on actually trying to come up with physical evidence that actually links Klansnic to the crime, which I believe I have, where Derek has just been kind of ruffling feathers and I found him, but he hasn't really been looking for any of the evidence.
Do you guys, or do you have a motive? What's James Klansnic's motive to do this?
So Klansnic's motive, that's a very good question, Darren. And he could have several motives. One of them being he worked on the brake system for the SST.
Mm-hmm.
He put a lot of work into that. Obviously, the SST got canceled shortly before Norjack. So the timing on that's right. That could have been an influence. At the same time, there was a lot of stuff going on in the Seattle area with the aerospace industry, a lot of people were getting laid off. I mean, there were signs at the time saying "last one out, turn off the light." You know, it was pretty doomy and gloomy there for a second. That could have been a motive for Klansnic. There could have been many other motives. One of which that I've looked into extensively, which I feel could have been a really great motive, was the Avro Aero project in Canada back in the 50s. Do you know anything about the Avro Aero at all, Darren?
No, I don't.
So the Avro Aero, that was a supersonic. It was pretty much a supersonic plane that was being developed by Canada in the late 50s, I believe. And it was awesome. It was ahead of its time. It was great work. Had the best engineers working on it. And it was one of the first things. It was one of the greatest things that was going to happen to supersonic travel. And it got cut off by our own government. The U.S. government pretty much sabotaged the Avro Aero project for missiles and other stuff. There's a belief that in the aerospace industry, a lot of those guys that got laid off the Aero, they ended up working for Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and other spots in Puget Sound and in Seattle. And Klansnic worked with a lot of those guys. There's a belief that maybe Klansnic was doing it for them to get one back against the U.S. government. There's also a belief that Klansnic could have been working with the CIA. That's definitely another possibility. When you were mentioning members of Klansnic's family, I was talking to. I did talk to Kevin, which I mentioned, but I also talked, and I have got ongoing relationship with his best friend, Klansnic's best friend. His name is John Shorkey. He's actually still alive. He's 92 years old, and I've reached out to John Shorkey's son, John Shorkey Jr. He's been like I say, Bruce likes to say, a little bit adversarial
About Klansnic being Cooper.
about Klansnic being Cooper. Yes, he's been very adversarial with me. I mean, I can understand for somewhat he's trying to protect his 92-year-old father. But his son, Drew Shorkey, so Klansnic's best friend's grandson, he's actually been very open, very helpful, very cool. He told me about his experience that one time he met Klansnic when he visited his cabin out in Whidbey Island. You know where that is, Darren?
I do. Whidbey.
Whidbey Island. I know you're pretty familiar with the Pacific Northwest, right?
Yeah, it's Whidbey Island.
Whidbey. Okay, cool. Yeah. So Whidbey Island. So yeah, Klansnic's family has a cabin out there in Whidbey. I believe they still own the cabin. And he kind of told me about his experience when he was out there in Whidbey. He didn't really have much to share. That he just said, Klansnic was, a nice guy. He knew how to cook. He knew how to fish for the. He knew how to catch the crabs and cook up all the seafood. And he was a really knowledgeable guy. That's pretty much all they were able to tell me because they were really young at the time. What Drew told me, he told me that Jim was actually a Boeing test pilot. That's the first time I've ever heard that.
I haven't heard that about him either.
Me either, right? Yeah, so his grandson Drew told me that he was also a Boeing test pilot, which I haven't heard about Klansnic before. I mean, I knew he was an hydraulics and pneumatics engineer for 37 years, but I didn't know he was an actual test pilot. Okay, but we knew Klansnic was a pilot. Going back to Klansnic, just to kind of give you a little backstory. Maybe we could have started with this in the beginning, Darren, but just to give a little backstory here on Klansnic. He was actually born in 1920 in Washington, a little farming town by the name of Enumclaw. Enumclaw. Been through there before, Darren?
I have. I grew up not too far from there.
Oh, cool, man. Yeah, so he was born in Enumclaw in 1920, and then he joined the army in, I believe, 45.
Yeah, and his military career is pretty interesting.
It's yeah. So he was a shot. So yeah, his military career. He was Army Air Corps, B-17 pilot, and then during World War II over Steyr, Austria, in April 1944, his B-17 was shot down by German forces. The plane was in flames, and Klansnic and his crew were forced to jump out of the plane. Mr. Klansnic jumped from the bomb bay of the B-17 at 26,000 feet and parachuted safely to the ground. James knew a few members of his crew were able to evade the Nazis for a day and half before finally getting captured by the Germans. Okay. But, so I look at that back then, you have to say, hey, that'd have to be some pretty good training for a Cooper jump. When you think
26,000 feet, yeah, that's wild. And then he was a prisoner of war for over a year.
Exactly. And he evaded capture for 2 days. People try to ask, like, how he didn't have any... A common question with Klansnic is, well, he didn't have any recreational skydiving experience. Well, I'll tell you this. He was in great shape. He was skiing up until his 90s. If you look in his obituary, he was working out at the Bellevue. It shows he was working at the Bellevue Club. He was in great shape at the time for 50 years old. I'm sure. I mean, just the description of Cooper, about 5'10" to 6 foot, slender. I mean, it was a guy in pretty decent shape. He wasn't any kind of a slog, you know. Klansnic definitely was in shape to be able to do this jump, and the fact that you want to point out he didn't have any recreational skydiving experience. I feel like his vent back in World War II, having to jump out the Bombay shaft, evade, getting. He was already getting shot down. They already knew where he landed, so you already kind of. It's not like on the DB Cooper where he was able to control the situation and fly out of sight. This time they knew exactly where you were, and he was still able to escape enemy capture. And if you look at the conditions back when he jumped in 44, it was April back then in Austria.
So the weather conditions were probably pretty similar.
If you look at the kind of equipment they had back in the day, that stuff was pretty goddamn heavy.
I'm sure it was.
So that'd probably equal to most of the money that he was carrying. So when you consider all that he was able to do that, if he was able to do that, I think Norjack was child's play for him.
And have you seen Marty Andraday's research about World War II jumps under terrible circumstances?
I did, and every one of those guys made it pretty much, right?
Yeah, I mean, he makes a really good point for the fact that Cooper lived.
Yeah, and I mean, I absolutely believe he lived 100%. He did not. Anyone that
I do too.
Yeah, that whole thing that he didn't is just the whole FBI narrative. I mean, Bruce has hammered this home quite a bit. It was the whole narrative by the FBI. At first, they were keen on getting them. Once they realized they were out of their depths, then they were in save face mode. Let's cover it up. Let's not make our butts look stupid.
Right.
You know, they went from we know we can totally find DB Cooper. Once they realized he got him, then the whole narrative was he didn't make it. He was a wuffo. Except he didn't know what he was doing, etc., etc. So that's why they got Norman Hayden on board, and they got a couple puppet guys to help kind of drill that narrative and just make everyone think DB Cooper died. Let's not worry about it. If everyone thinks DB Cooper died, this thing will die off. Heat's off us, right?
Well, 50 years later, we're still talking about it.
50 years later, we're still talking about it because there isn't, I wouldn't say there isn't because I got it now, but there wasn't a resolution of this case.
Well, now that we've got a little bit more info on Klansnic, let's hear what your smoking gun is.
The tie analysis by Tom Kay, it kind of started it all off. I mean, I kind of went by that as that. I mean, that's the only physical evidence we got here.
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much. Besides the money that was found on Tina Bar, that's pretty much the only physical evidence we got.
Yeah, there's no argument there.
Right? I don't know what else. I don't know what else there is. Okay. And then you have some people that want to argue, well, what if it wasn't DB Cooper's tie? What if he grabbed it as a disguise? Well, here's what I have to say to that. Okay. That tie brand new was $2 at JCPenney.
It's an affordable tie.
Affordable tie, right? So if you were going to put a disguise together, why, if the way DB Cooper thought things out, it didn't fit the MO that he would walk into some kind of a local, because the main theory is that he just kind of the day before or whatever went and got a little outfit to put on, right? It was his normal clothes or like the day before or two he picked up the outfit and at a Goodwill or something and made something up, right? That's kind of the thinkings, right?
I agree. It's got to be one of those two.
Right. So what do I say about the Goodwill? It's like, why do you go to Goodwill to get a tie? You can get one brand new one for $2, and then when you walk into a Goodwill, it's more conspicuous because a Goodwill, if you're in a Goodwill, there's not that many customers coming through as much as like a department store like JCPenney. So you're more likely to get spotted or someone remembering you if you go in a Goodwill or a thrift store and then picking up the same clothes that DB Cooper just got recognized on, then going into a JCPenney or a department store or something like that.
Right, where they could have sold dozens of that same tie that same day.
Exactly. It's like $2. So it just doesn't make sense. And then also, like, why would you think to put another tie on? Because this was the day and age in 1970s. There was no forensics or anything like that. So why would you be paranoid not to wear, like, you can wear, what would someone think not to wear their own tie? Like, it was a black clip-on tie. Like, that's the generic, it's a very generic tie. So why would someone think, oh yeah, someone's going to recognize me by a black clip-on tie? How many people wear black clip-on ties? So why steal one?
Right.
You know? So that's where it's 90%, I get up to 99.9%. That was DB Cooper. That was DB Cooper's tie. He didn't borrow it. He didn't grab it he didn't grab it off a thrift store just to wear as an outfit. That was his tie. and he left it behind. He left it behind by mistake. It was an oversight, or maybe not by.
I definitely agree with that.
Or maybe he knew like, okay, the tie wasn't going to link back to me because this wasn't the DNA age.
Yeah, and he was careful to even get notes back. So I think he left the tie there on accident.
I would think he left it on accident for sure, And then I believe Euless, actually, who was on an earlier podcast with you guys, he actually made a very good. I think it was him that actually made a very good point about it. He said it was very dark, though all the lights were off, so it was easy for him to put his tie down, and then it blends in with the seat, and he wouldn't have noticed it to pick it back up.
Yeah, and he had a lot going on at the time.
He wanted that money in a knapsack, so he didn't get the money in a knapsack, and that kind of bothered him. And then he had to figure out a way to secure the money a different way. That's why he wanted the knapsack to have the lid over the top, so it'd be easier. But because they gave it to him in the bank bag, the ends of the bag were exposed, or at least one end of the bag was exposed. Because they gave him in that, it was exposed on the bottom. It wasn't going to be easily just to strap up on him without flying out. So that's why he wanted that knapsack. He specifically asked for that knapsack. And that knapsack actually brings another hint to the case. The term knapsack is synonymous with... Have you ever used the word knapsack before, Darren? Just out of curiosity.
I haven't used the word knapsack.
You haven't?
No, definitely not. Especially referring to a backpack.
Definitely not. The backpack. Most people say backpack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like who says knapsack? Even in the 70s, like I was asking people, and maybe like most people still in the 70s said backpack. They didn't say knapsack. So, gotta ask yourself. D.B. Cooper asked for a knapsack. He used that word for a reason. There had to have been some kind of influence in his life that made him use that word, because your vocabulary kind of gets you develop vocabulary from different stuff you're involved in and stuff like that.
So why did he say knapsack?
So I found out that James Klansnic is a member of the Mountaineers, long-time member. His kids are still a member. His kid Jimmy the Jet is still a member of the Mountaineers. So they're avid hikers, mountaineer type. And mountaineers, they use that word. That's a mountaineer term. Knapsack is a mountaineer term. So it's speculated that D.B. Cooper was an outdoorsman, mountaineer type. So that's another box that checks there. And it makes sense because he knew the area well. If he was a mountaineer in the Washington area, Klansnic was a mountaineer in the Washington area, you would know that whole terrain, just like Klansnic did. And to be able to survive out in the wilderness for a little bit and do whatever he needed to do.
That makes sense. But that's not your smoking gun.
That is not my smoking gun. So my smoking gun, I don't know if you guys had the opportunity to. I know you did, Darren. You were there for Tom K's tie analysis at the Cooper conference earlier this year.
Yep.
You were there, and fortunately I couldn't make it, but it was great that it was uploaded on YouTube and I was able to watch the whole thing. And it helped me figure out the missing links I had. It kind of put everything together for me, which I was close. But then after hearing Tom's report at the conference, I was able to finally figure it out. And what I was able to figure out was the majority of those particles from the Macron's test that he did in 2017. The majority of the particles, 17 of the, I think they found, I don't know the exact list. It was like maybe 30 something tops. But 17 of those I've been able to attribute to one source, which is welding fumes, or welding fumes from forms of fusion welding, specifically TIG welding.
And Klansnic would have been doing a bunch of TIG welding?
Yes. I sent you a document. It was an unclassified government document, which references Klansnic doing fusion welding in 1968.
Yeah, you've practically become a metallurgist looking into this tie.
I've practically become a metallurgist, TIG welder. I could probably TIG weld now if I wanted to. But yeah, I've dug deep into the particles. I've been able to match 17 of the particles from the 2017 McCombs Labs report to one single source, which is welding fumes. At first I thought it was coming from the electrode rods that were being welded, because they had the yttrium in there, they had the cerium, they had a lot of the particles that were found, right? So I thought the particles were coming from welding the electrodes. They're like rods, and they have to be welded to a fine point when you do your weld. So I'm like, okay, yeah, he was probably standing around the grinder while they were welding the rods, and that's how he picked up the particles on his tie. It makes perfect sense. Only problem was a lot of other particles on there. So it wasn't until a couple months ago where we got where they uploaded Kay's report, and then Kay, on his report, he started mentioning a bunch of toxic particles that were found on the tie. And you were there, Darren. I'm sure you remember him saying this.
Yep.
He was like, if you know where DB Cooper got these toxic particles, please let me know.
Yeah, because it's a pretty rare combination of metals and materials.
It was a pretty rare combination, right? Because there were some definitely like toxic particles there, like lead, and I'll actually give you the whole breakdown right here for my notes of all the particles that I've actually been able to match up.
I thought it was pretty cool too how you went to some like TIG welding Facebook groups to ask their advice. I thought that was a really interesting way to gather information.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, like I said, man, because I'm not an expert in this field, like I've just kind of had to learn this stuff. So I wanted to go to actual TIG welders, actually experts in the field, to see if they can kind of confirm my findings. You know.
Yeah, and you sent me that screenshot about guys talking about uh, TIG welding in the 70s and different methods and processes for it back then.
Exactly, and that's where someone like Tom K, he doesn't have the knowledge in that area, so when people so he can't really speak on it. Like he was kind of he did a good job of kind of speculating with the particles. I thought the CRT was the most obvious kind of thing there with all the particles that came up. So I see how he came up with that. But there's a better explanation that includes more of the particles, which is welding fumes, and a lot of the toxic particles that he was talking about. So I'm actually just going to list off the 17 particles here that are all found. Well, so I won't mention the electrodes, just the toxic ones here. That Tom K was alluding to, and then other ones that he thought were actually for CRT. So like cadmium, vadmium, I believe those are some of the toxic ones. Lead, which was also found. But basically, when you look all 17 particles, if you want to run down the list, we got tungsten, cerium, zinc, yttrium, antimony, cadmium, vanadium, iron, cobalt, iron, chromium, copper, aluminum, nickel, tin, lead, and molybdenum. Okay, all of those can be found in welding fumes. Okay. Now I remember when I thought it was actually the TIG welding rods that were the source for this, and I asked you to ask Kay, and thanks for asking that, because that actually helped me figure more stuff out. And when he asked him that, he actually
My
told
pleasure.
you that there were, if it was from the TIG welding and welding rods, he said there would be more thoriated tungsten there. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
He said there would be more thoriated tungsten. So with actually speaking with some old school TIG welders, they told me that was the norm back in the day. They weren't using thoriated tungsten that early on. You got to remember, a lot of the TIG welders that I spoke to, they were amazed that anyone was doing fusion welding in 1968. I mean, that's how cutting edge it was.
Yeah, they were using new exotic materials at the time.
Exactly. So this was a new cutting edge process. So TIG was just kind of on the forefront at this point. And there wasn't many people doing it, and the people that actually knew how to do it, they were managers. They were overseeing this, like Klansnic, obviously, and he actually has experience because his father, in the 1920s, worked for the black. He actually had some welding patents. Back in the 1920s, he worked in the Black Diamond district in Washington.
Oh, Klansnic father actually had a bunch of welding patents?
Welding patents in the 1920s. He worked for the Black Diamond area in Washington in the mines. So I guess he did a lot of welding for the mine work and stuff like that.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So yeah, so welding is definitely, in the family. So basically all of these particles right here, you'll find in fusion weld fumes. That's what I've been able to establish 100% concrete. So when all those poisonous particles are in there, which are in welding fumes, and then you got all the other stuff too. And then the fact that there is no thoriated tungsten in there, that actually points to the right time frame. And then also you said that Kay mentioned that there'd be more tungsten in there if it was coming from TIG welding electrodes. Well, I looked this up, and the tungsten electrodes in the process doesn't actually I believe the word they use is splatter. So it doesn't actually, you don't find too much of the tungsten in the fumes, just because how heavy of element it is, and it doesn't really splatter much. So they did find some tungsten, but just not a lot. But before, when I told you that when you asked them the question of grinding the electrodes, yes, if you were to grind the electrodes, there should be more tungsten in there. But from the fumes, there wouldn't be as much tungsten in there. And the amount of tungsten found on the tie supports welding fumes, as well as the fact that there was no thoriated tungsten found on the tie.
That's interesting, because none of the other suspects have a real good account for why there is all that on the tie.
Right. No, and that's how I can pretty much eliminate every other suspect, Darren, because no other suspect has the background. No other suspect you can explain how they got those particles on the tie. No other suspect you can explain it. Most of the suspects that you have were in World War II for the most part, right? Why are they wearing clip-on ties, and they wouldn't be getting that stuff up on there? Rackstraw, McCoy, all these guys, because the tie, I believe the tie didn't begin production until, I don't have it in my notes here, but I believe it didn't begin production until about late 50s, and then kind of mid-late 60s it stopped production. So there's only a little like 10-year window there of the tie being produced, which most of the Vietnam guys are in Vietnam, they wouldn't even have that tie. And why would they be wearing a tie in war?
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. So, but basically, Darren, the smoking gun is that government document. I believe I sent it to you. You've seen it before, right?
Yes.
Right. It's the ST follow-on program document. It's since been declassified, and I was able to dig it up just from Google searching. And that right there is my smoking gun. If you go down to the references on that, Klansnic is referenced on a lot of different work there for that SST follow-on project,
Which is the Supersonic Transport Project.
Yes, it's actually was a follow-on because the Supersonic Transport program got canceled. Like I said, a little bit before NORJAC. Don't know the exact date on me at the moment, but it got canceled a little bit before NORJAC. But they continued with a follow-on.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I want to say it was like 18 months or something.
It sounds about right. But once it got scrapped, they didn't. All the work they did didn't really get. Didn't get scrapped. They were still. They still wanted to use that technology they've already kind of been working on to use on other planes. And it came out in the next the 747. The next model after the it was the 757. The next model after the 727 that kind of used the more futuristic stuff. But they were also working with the government on this follow-on program to also help out transportation, different stuff. So on this follow-on program, there's reference to James Klansnic in 1968 doing in-place fusion welding. Okay, of titanium alloy. One of the popular if you're doing fusion welding at the time, there's a couple of different methods. Probably around from what I've learned from talking to welders and stuff from around that era, they were probably doing TIG welding, which is TIG inert gas welding, or I'm sorry, tungsten inert gas welding, which uses those electrode rods that were found in there, and then the fumes, and gives off the fumes that were also found on the tie.
Okay.
We got the original discovery of the article of Klansnic's article back in 65, the 65-64 on the Hydraulics Pneumatics magazine on the Boeing 727. You got him. He's wearing pretty much what looks like an identical tie to the one they have in FBI evidence.
It is a pretty incredible photo.
It is a pretty incredible photo, right? When I looked at that.
Yeah, and I believe if anyone just Googles James Klansnic, it's one of the first few photos to pop up.
And it's incredible when you really look at it. Like I said, we sent matches to the top forensic guy in Houston, and he was blown away by what we sent him. But at any rate, we had that picture under the 727, the plane in question, wearing what looked like to be the very same tie in question minus the tie tack. That was in 64. Then we got a government document in 68 crediting him to in-place fusion welding. So we got him. First of all, there's no other suspect that we even have a picture with a black clip-on tie.
Well, I think you have Kenny Christensen black clip-on tie.
An airline shot with Kenny.
Yeah, in his airline uniform.
Okay, so we have someone else with the black clip-on tie. Okay. But then when you can put the fusion welding, which produces the welding fumes, which are found on the tie, that's pretty significant proof in my eyes that tie belonged to James Edward Klansnic.
Yeah, no one else really has a solution for the particles on the tie.
And I've came up with the solution, and the only reason I came up with the solution was because I found that reference first. I found the reference of the fusion welding, Klansnic fusion welding, and I'm like, okay. And then I started looking into that. I was still going by Tom K's tie report. When I found out the fusion welding, then I started trying to see what can I match up with fusion welding to with the particles on the tie. And the more I dug into it, the more particles I matched. And I'm like, hold on, there's too many things matching up here for it not to be related. And then at first I thought it came from the weld.
Especially with such a rare combo of materials.
Such a rare combo, man. And then at first I thought I got it. It was the rods. It's just the grinding the rods and it sparks up, and that's probably how it got on this tie. But then when I was watching Tom K's report from the conference, and he was talking about all of the poisonous particles, and I was like, well, wait a minute. And how do you explain these poisonous particles? And then I found out that those poisonous particles are found in welding fumes. And also the welding fumes contain the electrodes, particles of the electrodes in the fumes as well. So when I learned that, it's pretty clear that this tie was around fusion welding, was monitoring fusion weld. It was a manager engineer overlooking fusion TIG welding, fusion welding processes. Most likely TIG, because that's what was prominent at that time. And it matches up with the electrodes that were found on there.
Without really talking to the family, you don't really have any information on where he was Thanksgiving weekend of 71, do you?
You know what? I don't have any information because his family won't talk. But I mean, he has a big family. All of his family resides in the Washington area. All of his family is from the Pacific Northwest, for the most part. So why would he? He's a family man. You can look at, there's pictures still up on family Facebooks with Jim at family gatherings. So I don't see why he would leave the area when his whole family's there. He'd be there for family, for the Thanksgiving festivities. I don't see why he would leave.
Right.
But if he would, I mean, he could definitely sneak away for a little bit because he's still, he's Washington Navy. He can sneak away for a little bit and come back. He could have easily gotten back in time for Thanksgiving dinner in the morning. His family owned, Jim and his family owned a cabin in Woodbay, like I said before, which could have easily been flown into, and he could have came back for Thanksgiving dinner the same night, or maybe they're having Thanksgiving at the cabin. And he just flew in there, and no one was the wiser.
One thing I've been really interested in this is that there was a comic book called Dan Cooper, where it was like this pilot and stuntman, and there's pictures of him jumping out of airplanes. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the skyjacker chooses the name Dan Cooper. Do you think Klansnic has seen that comic book?
I absolutely 100% do. And I believe that's what inspired him. I absolutely believe that it's not a coincidence by any means. When you consider that the similar events in the comic actually happened before the hijacking.
Yes.
That is way too much of a coincidence. Way too much of a coincidence. Okay. So I believe Klansnic was probably reading the comic for sure. I've learned that the parents of Albert Weinberg, the creator of the DB Cooper comic, were actually living in the same city as Klansnic's family for a period of time at the same time.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, which was very, very interesting. So I don't know if there's a connection there between them. But here's what I know. For someone to use that name, Dan Cooper, considering the comic, like what the comic was and everything. Basically, if you haven't heard about the Dan Cooper comic, just kind of a little bit of a quick brief on it. The guy was basically like a Canadian James Bond fighter pilot dude. He would get shot down. He was doing all kinds of futuristic piloting of aircraft and all kinds of different stuff. But he was pretty much like a James Bond of the skies type of dude.
Yeah, there's an infinite number of male names you could have chosen, and to choose one that happens to be a comic book that's similar.
Yeah, to choose Dan Cooper was a very interesting choice. And then when you look at Klansnic's life, you see that he's a shot down fighter pilot in World War II. Dan Cooper was a shot down fighter pilot as well. Klansnic was working on piloting futuristic space age travel. The SST project. There was some projects going before that was also on the supersonic space age kind of thing, aerospace kind of thing. That he was working on. So he pretty much lived the life.
If you feel like the show ended abruptly, you're right. I had some technical issues that cut our conversation short. Nicky and I still have a lot to cover, so we're going to pick up where we left off in part 2 that will be out shortly. If you have any questions, comments, or top secret information on the case, you can reach us on Facebook at the Cooper Vortex or email us at dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you to NickyB for working with me despite technical problems I caused. Thank you to Russell Colbert for being patient and putting up with me. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.